What's not to like about Garstang, with its stone-built cottages, its Jacobean market cross, the best cheese pie shop in Lancashire, the medieval bridge and its flower-bedecked pubs? Well, if I'm being honest, the thundering traffic down High Street is what not to like about Garstang, coupled with the fact that the pavements are so ancient and narrow that even Callista Flockhart would have difficulty walking along them without various parts of her anatomy projecting into the scrum. The tourist information bods call Garstang the gateway to the Pennines. We're not sure why. There are loads of gateways into the Pennines, some of them even in Yorkshire. It probably just sounded quite romantic at the meeting. The town sits on the ancient highway between London and Edinburgh, an important staging post during the 18th century. At one time there were 13 pubs in the town, which seems a bit excessive, but Garstang's been bustling since 1310, when it was granted a charter for both a market and a cattle fair. In its heyday, High Street was crammed with bellowing cows, which explains the large number of pubs. The equally bellowing locals requiring sanctuary from the moving wall of beef. Anyhow, as tradition dictates, our first port of call is the Old Tithe Barn pub, whose name is more than just a marketing gimmick. Tithe barns have been around since the medieval period, used primarily to store the tithes in for the local priests. Some of the vicars around Garstang must have been extremely fat. Garstang's old tithe barn boasts a museum upstairs on its mezzanine, or at least it did. We haven't been in for a while, we can't afford to. It's more of an exhibit than a museum, but 10 out of 10 for the effort. The building stands on the canal basin where once, long ago, exotic goods were loaded and unloaded from barges. Well, okay, they weren't that exotic, being mainly the produce of local farms. Lancaster Canal wasn't actually connected to the rest of the network back then because the River Ribble was in the way. Nowadays, the barges have gone, and the canal basin is full of colourful narrowboats and moorhens that resemble gonks on stilts. Back in the day, the canal company ran a fly passenger service. It travelled at 8 miles an hour from Preston to Kendal and cost just 3 shillings. The 14-hour trip proved surprisingly popular with humans as well as flies, transporting upwards of 30,000 passengers every year. However, we've finished our pints and fed the ducks, so it's time to head off in search of Greenhall Castle. We can't leave the town centre though without mention of the stocks. Garstang stocks were portable, hauled out and dusted down and clamped to the cobbles when and as necessary. During slacker periods of crime they were kept in the town hall attic. Unfortunately, in 1939 the town hall roof went up in flames. These stocks were never replaced. Garstang had its own ducking stool once as well, designed to chastise nagging wives by forcibly submerging them underwater. It was located off Green Lane. The town was obviously a hotbed of criminal activity in the medieval period because it also had its own gallows. Not in the market square, as you might expect. Rotting cadavers were never regarded as very hygienic, but to the north end of the town, down Hanging Lane. Hanging Lane has gone now too, but somewhat disturbingly originally ran beneath what is nowadays Garstang Primary School. Anyhow, Greenhall Castle, which is nothing more than a mound of rubble to be truthful, although a mound with a great deal of history. The only way to reach it really is on foot down Castle Lane, which is so narrow that anything wider than a fat goat could easily get wedged down it. The castle was built by Sir Thomas Stanley back in 1490. He wasn't a very popular bloke. At the Battle of Bosworth between Henry VII and Richard III, he waited to see which side was winning. As Richard was surrendering, Stanley sent in his men to finish him off, nicking his crown in the process. By way of thanks, Henry gave Stanley the land on which Greenhall Castle now stands. There's not much left of the building now, just one window and part of a fireplace. In fact, it seems to get smaller every year, whenever the nearby farm buildings need repairing. It's a joke. The castle was reduced to rubble by Cromwell's troops. By that point it was owned by James Stanley, previously known as Lord Strange. Following in the footsteps of his not-so-illustrious ancestor, James was another thoroughly unpleasant bloke. During the Civil War, amongst other atrocities, he attacked Bolton and slaughtered 1,500 residents. Then he plundered the wreckage for spoil. If that wasn't bad enough, his butler was amongst the 700 prisoners who'd survived the massacre. On hearing that his master was in charge, the humble servant pleaded clemency. James Stanley was having none of it. Mercilessly, he ran the unarmed man through with his sword, while his bodyguards held him down. Whilst James was otherwise occupied with the murder of his servant, Greenhall Castle itself was under siege from Cromwell's troops. At one point, they decided to dig a tunnel beneath the foundations and fill it with gunpowder. Unfortunately, their cunning plan backfired when the tunnel collapsed on their heads. As it turned out, the castle was pretty unassailable, right up until the moment when Mr. Anderton, the castle's governor, suddenly dropped dead without warning. Whether out of panic or grief, history doesn't furnish us with the details, Lady Derby surrendered. 1 year later, the dastardly James Stanley was captured and frog-marched back to Bolton. Having been asked if he had any last words, James, understandably perhaps, attempted to stall his execution for as long as possible. After much impassioned stomping around the platform, the executioner grew weary of his procrastinations and lobbed his head off. We've said enough. I can hear everybody yawning. Click like, subscribe and go and get your dinner, and we'll meet up back here next week for another episode of Lancashire Footnotes.